How do you teach middle schoolers to write, or high schoolers for that matter, or elementary school students or master's degree students? I want to suggest that it's not that much different whether you're in first grade or whether you're working on your MFA. Some of the elements are going to remain the same. I've been teaching a middle school co-op this year. I have my MFA. I have written 3 books. I've written innumerable essays, articles, and poems that have been published and received awards. And when I go back and look at what it means to learn to write, there are so many different pieces, and to simplify it and break it down is a really important part of the act of teaching. So to begin with, I would start with this. We have to get students first to love the idea of language. So you don't want to start by teaching grammar. I would start by simply having them read and then write responses. Some kids get stuck even there, right? Even just with the idea of sitting there to write and being able to write a sentence or two or three. And so I would suggest starting with reading a book that is quality. You know already what I think about reading quality so that we can write quality. We cannot write better than what it is that we read. So read something that interests them, but that is also something that is written well, and then ask them to respond to it in writing. And this should not be formal initially. As you're just starting out the year, this should just be writing out their thoughts. And you might give them a prompt. What do you think the character is thinking? What do you think the character is going to do? How might the character change? What do you think about the setting? How does the setting play into what the story is going to be about? Any of those things. So reading and writing loosely and freely and just getting into the process of writing is the first step. The second step is to start all of the other pieces of language acquisition and development. And that is alongside the reading, alongside the writing that you're already doing, start to integrate spelling, start to integrate grammar, start to integrate vocabulary. And I have another video with some of the resources on exactly what I would recommend to use to be able to do this well. But the piece that I would start with more than anything else in terms of starting to formalize their writing, whether it's creative writing or whether it's more expository writing, is to start to look at the organization of writing. And before I ask them to organize, I'm going to ask them to look at another piece of writing and outline that piece of writing. What is the thesis? What are the topic sentences? What are the supporting pieces of information underneath those topic sentences? And if we can have them do this relatively quickly on a number of pieces of writing, so let's say we have them do 3 or 4 or 5 outlines of a 1 to 2 page piece of writing, depending, of course, on what their age is, that starts to give them the idea of what structure can look like within a piece of writing. And I would say nonfiction is probably the best place to start on this. Fiction is a very different sort of a beast and an animal to tackle. So start with that for the nonfiction. Have them read and outline several pieces of writing. And this should be done relatively quickly. I wouldn't spread this out. I would even do this even on consecutive days and then certainly consecutive weeks. And then at that point, we start working on organization. Once we've developed the love of it language, we've got them writing freely, we're starting to build up the building blocks of language, then we can start to have them work on how their piece might be structured. If they're the best writer in the world and they can use every literary device and they understand prepositional phrases, but they don't know how to organize a piece of writing, it will never work. Now, there's a couple of different ways that can be helpful to start to have them organize their own writing. And one of them involves something that has nothing to do with writing. And it's something that will both serve them well from the communications perspective as a speaker, as well as a writer. So you've already got them outlining other pieces of writing. And then we're going to introduce essentially an improvisational exercise. And this is a lot of fun. It gets people out of their comfort zone, but it also gets them out there and really thinking quickly. And that is that we have people stand up, give them a topic, and they have to immediately start to speak on that topic and say, there are 3 points that I'm going to address. This one, and this one. Have them speak to each of those points, and then they can conclude and sit down. Now, this can be something as simple as, please stand up and talk to us about how you might make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. This is actually a debate tactic for learning how to speak in a way that is free flowing and yet organized, be able to think on your feet, but it also will get their minds into this idea of how do you organize your writing. You can put them out in separate groups to do this and then walk around to those groups if you have a larger classroom. How do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? Well, I'd like to talk about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And there are three pieces that are the most important. The first is to prepare your materials, the second is to make your sandwich, and the third is to put things away. And then you go into each of those points and you say, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are one of the favorite lunches for kids across America. And if you follow these three steps, you'll certainly be successful in ensuring that you have good nutrition in the middle of your day. Something as simple as that. So that starts to organize their thoughts into threes. Now, is the 5 paragraph essay the only thing they're ever going to need to write? And is it the most important thing for them to write? Maybe, maybe not. But it does start to teach you to organize your thoughts. It teaches the writer to organize his or her thoughts. So they've already analyzed other writing. You're working on other writing skills. You do the improvisational exercise, and this can be done many times, and you can pop this into your lesson plans at any point that you need to increase the energy. If you need to decrease it, it's probably not the right one. You might want to go back to analyzing other writing. And then once they have a writing topic or assignment, then they understand, they have internalized this concept of what it means to organize writing into 3 sections, put the corresponding information that goes under each of those sections, and then begin to do the writing. That organizational piece is the most important part of how they will then progress into the rest of their writing. And we'll talk about ways to do that later. But even if they're not writing very well yet, and hopefully you've covered some basic things like subject and predicate and that kind of a thing, so they're at least having complete sentences as part of what they're writing. If they can at least put their ideas into the right sections, then you can start to work on the specifics of making that writing even stronger. But at least organized writing will allow a reader to be able to understand the progression of those ideas, the thesis statement, and the conclusion. And with that, then you can move on to some of the more nuanced forms of using language well and starting to really have fun with it. Looking forward to your thoughts and how this works in your classroom.